I'm Jaafar Jackson, and I'm here to talk about how I prepared for the role of Michael Jackson. Tour footage from my uncles, particularly Michael with the Bad Tour and Dangerous Tour, that really...
For years, people believed Michael Jackson's stage presence was something no one else could ever recreate. Then Jaafar Jackson walked onto the screen, and even his own family froze. Cast as his uncle in the upcoming biopic Michael, the son of Jermaine Jackson delivered a performance that left longtime insiders speechless, with some saying it felt like watching the king of pop himself return for one more take. But the story doesn't end there. Not everyone in the family saw it the same way, and that difference in reaction set off tension nobody outside the family was supposed to know about. What exactly did Jaafar do that left some relatives in tears and others uneasy? And what was it about his performance that ended up dividing the very people who knew Michael best? Stick around, because the full story behind that screening room is more complicated than anyone expected. The moment everything changed. The private screening room went dark, and the Jackson family took their seats with expectations already running high. Over the years, they had watched plenty of Michael Jackson tribute acts, impersonators who could land the moonwalk perfectly, dancers who had memorized every beat of the Thriller video frame by frame, singers who could hit those unmistakable high notes. But this was different. This wasn't a tribute act. This was family. This was Jaafar Jackson, Jermaine's own son, stepping into the role of his uncle Michael for a major Hollywood biopic directed by Anton Fuqua. The pressure in that room was almost unbearable, and everyone present understood exactly what was riding on the next 2 hours. Then the film began, and within minutes, something happened that no one in that room was ready for. Jermaine Jackson, the brother who had shared a stage with Michael for decades, who knew every gesture, every vocal tick, every subtle habit his brother carried, started to cry. Not a polite, misty-eyed reaction either. This was raw, unguarded emotion, the kind that comes from somewhere you can't control. Later, once he'd had time to process what he'd just witnessed, Jermaine admitted that in that moment, Jaafar simply became Michael on screen. He couldn't reconcile what his eyes were telling him. His own son had somehow transformed into his brother, and that realization hit him hard enough to bring genuine tears. He wasn't alone. Other relatives seated around him reacted the exact same way. For those few overwhelming minutes, they weren't looking at Jaafar anymore. They were looking at their brother, their uncle, the family member they had lost back in 2009. And it wasn't just the physical resemblance doing the work. There was something underneath it, something in the energy and presence Jaafar had somehow managed to capture that made the illusion complete. The room broke down because, for a moment, it genuinely felt like Michael was back. That's the level of conviction Jaafar brought to the role. The people watching couldn't process what they were seeing in real time. This wasn't a polite reaction from relatives trying to support a family member's first acting role. This was real shock from the people who understood Michael Jackson more intimately than anyone else on earth. And that reaction revealed something worth paying attention to. Jaafar hadn't simply learned to mimic his uncle's mannerisms. He had found a way to tap into the essence of who Michael actually was. But here's the question worth sitting with. How does a young man with zero professional acting experience pull off something that seemed genuinely impossible? And just as importantly, what did it cost him to get there? The preparation nobody saw. Jaafar Jackson didn't simply wake up one day and decide to play Michael Jackson in a film. This journey began long before any cameras rolled, and it started with a hard truth. He had never acted professionally in his life, not once. When the role was first offered to him, Jaafar wrestled with serious doubt. He understood exactly what stepping into Michael's shoes would mean. The expectations from millions of fans around the world. The scrutiny waiting from critics. The weight of an entire family legacy resting on his shoulders. And he had no formal training to help him carry any of it, which left him genuinely torn over whether he could even attempt it. Most people facing those odds would have turned the offer down. The risk of failing publicly was simply too steep, but Jaafar chose a different path. He decided that if he was going to take this on, He was going to do it properly, even if that meant starting completely from scratch. He brought in an acting coach and spent an entire year focused purely on the fundamentals of acting itself. Not Michael's mannerisms yet, not the dance steps or the vocal techniques, just the basic craft, what it actually means to inhabit a character and make believable choices in front of a camera. Only once that foundation was solid did he begin the real work of transforming into Michael Jackson. From there, Jaafar gathered an enormous archive of footage, pulling from YouTube and other sources. Not just the iconic performances everyone has already seen 100 times, but the obscure material too. Backstage moments, casual, unguarded conversations where Michael had no idea a camera was even rolling, rehearsal footage showing him working through choreography rather than performing the polished final version. He studied every frame obsessively. The way Michael transitioned between movements, the precise tilt of his head during certain vocal phrases, the small, almost unconscious hand gestures he used while speaking, the presence he carried into a room even when he wasn't performing at all. Jaafar built a mental catalog of Michael's physicality, his habits, his energy, one so thorough that he could eventually draw on it instinctively rather than consciously calculating every single choice in the moment. The physical transformation that followed. After absorbing everything from those hours of footage, Jaafar didn't just study Michael. He let everything he'd learned move through his own body and instincts. The next phase was physical, and it may have been the hardest part of all. Michael Jackson stands among the greatest dancers in music history, and his choreography pushed even trained professionals to their limits. Jaafar had to match that intensity while simultaneously acting, singing, and hitting emotional beats on camera. For the Beat It sequence, the production rebuilt the exact Los Angeles street where the original video was filmed back in 1983. For 2 full nights, sunset to sunrise, Jaafar danced on bare cement in freezing temperatures while the cameras kept rolling. His feet went numb from the cold and the constant impact, and at one point they actually began to bleed. He kept dancing anyway, because that's what Michael would have done. Recreating that video properly meant matching the same physical commitment Michael had given it, and Jaafar refused to settle for anything less. More than once during that shoot, he had to remind himself that this was real, that he was actually standing in the same spot where Michael once made history. Smooth Criminal brought its own test, the legendary anti-gravity lean, a move that looks like pure magic on screen but actually demands special shoes, exceptional core strength, and razor-sharp precision to pull off safely. As a kid, Jaafar had watched that same lean and assumed Michael simply had superpowers. Learning the mechanics behind it didn't ruin the illusion for him. If anything, it deepened his respect for how far Michael pushed himself to make the impossible look effortless. Almost none of this happened in public view. Fans saw the casting announcement and a handful of behind-the-scenes photos, but they had no idea how many years Jaafar had quietly poured into this role before a single frame was shot. And there was one person who never let him face it alone. Throughout this entire process, Jaafar's biggest supporter was his father, Jaafar Jackson. This wasn't just a proud parent cheering from the sidelines. Jaafar had lived the story the film was telling. He'd stood on stage beside Michael during the Jackson 5 years, watched his younger brother grow into a global icon, and understood his mannerisms, his humor, his work ethic in ways no research footage ever could. When Jaafar needed to understand how Michael might have approached a scene, Jaafar gave him real memory instead of guesswork. And just as importantly, he gave Jaafar permission to make the role his own, rather than chase a flawless imitation that would feel hollow on screen. But that support was about to be tested in a way nobody saw coming, because not every member of the Jackson family walked out of that screening room feeling the same way. The screening that split a family, the very same private screening that brought Jaafar to tears, triggered a very different response from another family member, Janet Jackson. Reports suggest tension rose fast once the lights came up. Janet reportedly raised serious concerns about how parts of Michael's story were handled on screen, questioning certain creative decisions and worrying that some moments didn't honor her brother the way she felt they should. That put Jermaine in a difficult spot, caught between his sister's concerns and his own son's years of sacrifice. He chose to stand by the film and by Jaafar's performance, which he considered nothing short of extraordinary. That decision opened up something deeper than a disagreement about a movie. It touched on long-standing questions within the family about who gets to tell Michael's story and how different relatives choose to honor his memory. Janet's concerns came from wanting to protect her brother's legacy. Jermaine's defense came from wanting to protect his son. Both reactions, even in conflict, came from the same place: love. What the people closest to Michael actually said. Despite the tension, something remarkable stayed consistent. Even relatives who had concerns about parts of the film agreed that Jaafar had pulled off something extraordinary in the role itself. Jaafar later shared that his grandmother, Jaafar Jackson, told him just how much he'd embodied Michael, admitting there were moments she genuinely couldn't tell whether she was watching her grandson or her son. Coming from the woman who raised Michael from childhood, that meant more to Jaafar than any review ever could. Family members were also quick to draw a line between Jaafar and the many talented Michael Jackson impersonators performing around the world. As Jermaine put it, plenty of people imitate Michael, and some do it brilliantly. But imitation copies the surface. Jaafar, in his words, didn't imitate Michael. He became him. Director Anton Fuqua reportedly cast Jaafar for that very reason, betting an entire film on an unproven actor because he sensed Jaafar carried something no outside performer could fake. The weight Jaafar carried the whole way through. What's easy to overlook in all of this is the sheer psychological pressure Jaafar carried. Playing Michael Jackson isn't like playing any other historical figure. Every gesture would be measured against footage millions of people have already memorized. Jaafar found a way to carry that weight by focusing on one thing only: making Michael proud, rather than trying to please everyone watching. And because he was doing this as family, as Michael's own nephew, failure wouldn't have just been a bad review. It would have felt like letting the legacy down in front of the entire world. It was his father's unwavering belief in him that helped him keep pushing through every one of those moments. The inspiration nobody expected. Knowing the pressure and scrutiny waiting for him, why did Jaafar choose to take this on anyway, fully aware the outcome could have gone either way? The answer traces back further than anyone might guess, to a Jackson 5 anniversary concert in New York, the only time Jaafar ever saw his uncle Michael perform live. He was young enough then that the moment felt purely magical, not something to analyze. Watching the crowd's reaction, feeling that energy in the room, planted something in him. At the time, Jaafar wasn't even thinking about entertainment. He was training seriously in golf and considering it as his future. But that night changed the direction of his life. The other defining moment came earlier, watching Smooth Criminal as a child. The choreography, the storytelling, that gravity-defying lean. It felt like watching real magic. That sense of wonder never left him, and when the chance came to recreate that exact performance decades later, he carried that childhood memory with him into every take. There's also a simple biological truth that can't be ignored. Jaafar shares actual DNA with Michael Jackson. Crew members on set pointed to this repeatedly, noting that certain things, the tilt of his head, the way his hands moved when expressing emotion, the timing in his physical rhythm, weren't things he had to consciously build. They were already there, waiting to be drawn out through preparation. But DNA alone never guarantees a performance. Plenty of people share bloodlines with legendary performers without ever being able to convincingly embody them. What made this work was the combination: genetics, years of obsessive study, natural talent, and a father who gave him the tools and the belief to pull it all together. Why Michael himself would likely be proud. Several things point to Michael Jackson approving of what his nephew accomplished. Michael was famous for demanding excellence from himself, for endless rehearsal, for refusing to settle. Jaafar's willingness to train until his feet bled mirrors that exact standard. Michael also valued authenticity over imitation. He wanted performers to feel the truth of a moment rather than mechanically copy it, and that's precisely the approach Jaafar took. Michael was protective of his family's future too, and watching his nephew rise to an impossible challenge through sheer dedication would have meant something to him. And having lived his entire life under relentless public scrutiny, Michael would have understood exactly what Jaafar was signing up for, and respected the courage it took to do it anyway. The people who knew Michael best seemed to agree. Jermaine said as much outright. Catherine Jackson's emotional reaction said it without words. Even relatives who had concerns about other parts of the film acknowledged that Jaafar's performance honored Michael the way it should have. So now that you know the full story, does it change how you see this biopic, or the larger conversation around Michael's legacy? Was Jaafar's performance strong enough to justify Jermaine standing his ground the way he did? And what does this whole story say about how families carry on a legacy on? See, the person they're honoring is no longer here to weigh in themselves. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Celebrity Insider for more deep dives just like this one. There's another video waiting on your screen right now, and we think you're going to want to see it too.